So I'm Jen, I'm the Wild Christian Coordinator for Rocha UK. And for those who don't know, Rocha UK is a Christian conservation charity working with individuals and families, churches and Christian landowners and managers to restore and protect nature here in the UK. And Wild Christian is our community for individuals and families exploring the connections between our faith, the natural world, and how we live. So we'd love you to join us in learning about and enjoying God's creation together and speaking up for it too. And details will be shared a bit later on how to join our growing community. So it's such a critical week for the planet. So we're really happy that so many of you can be with us tonight. And it's really important for our charity that there's a joined up approach to climate change and biodiversity, the two crises that we face. So tonight, our Chief Exec, Andy, will be exploring the links between the two. And then you have the opportunity to ask Andy your questions. And we'll also show a video from Daryl, who I spoke with live from COP yesterday in preparation for this evening's webinar. So I'll just read Andy's little bio before he comes on. So Andy has a track record of campaigning and mobilizing the public around environment and development issues with both Christian and secular charities. He was previously CEO of Friends of the Earth in the UK for 7 years, also chairing the board of Friends of the Earth Europe. So prior to that, he was advocacy director at Tier Fund, where he established the development charity's work on climate change and was a founder member of the 2005 Make Poverty History campaign. Many of you might have been involved in that. So Andy has been to several COPs over the years. We won't say how many years, including COP26. He's been our leader here at Rocha UK since 2016. So Andy, please unmute your mic.
I am unmuted. Thank you. So thanks, Jen. And what I want to do briefly is take us in about 20 minutes through a number of issues surrounding climate and nature. Now, we're all used to hearing about the impact of climate on nature, aren't we? If anybody's been watching Frozen Planet recently, you will be very aware of the terrible impact of climate change already on iconic species like polar bears at the North Pole or penguins at the South Pole. But actually, here in the UK, we are also already experiencing big impacts of climate on nature. Sea level rise, for example, is swamping the nesting sites on shorelines for little terns. Waders are finding it harder and harder to feed in marshlands because those marshlands in the summers like the one we've just had are getting so dry they actually can't get their beaks into the mud. That's disastrous. Puffins are really suffering a decline because of the impact of warming water on their food supply of sand eels, which are going much, much further afield rather than coming close in. So we're used to, and we're seeing in this country now, the impact of climate change on nature itself. What we've heard very little about until relatively recently is the potentially positive impact that regenerating nature could actually have for climate. And that's my main focus today. How can we actually use nature? How can we welcome nature and restore nature in a way that's good for nature and is also good for climate change? So I'll be looking at what do we mean by nature-based solutions to climate change? I'll be looking at the benefits and risks of that, and there are some risks. I will be looking at what is on the agenda for the Biodiversity Day. That's tomorrow at COP27. And what does it mean for COP15, which some of you may have thinking, hang on, I thought we were at COP27. COP15 is the Biodiversity Convention conference, which is taking place in a month's time in Canada. And the two are linked, so I want to link them up. And then we'll end by looking at what can you actually do about it. We can then have some questions. And very importantly, we will then have a video from Daryl, our colleague Daryl, who's in Egypt right now at COP27 for a Rocha Ghana. Okay, that's what we'll do. And there'll be plenty of time for questions at the end. So if we can go on to the first slide, please. What are nature-based solutions to climate change? Well, a definition of nature-based solutions would be that they are approaches that work with and enhance nature on land and sea, providing benefits for both human well-being and for biodiversity to address societal challenges, including climate change. So there can be nature-based solutions to a raft of things. Here, we're focusing on nature-based solutions to climate change. So in terms of climate change, what actually could that mean? So nature-based solutions to climate change could both avoid greenhouse gas emissions and enhance our carbon sinks on land and sea. They could also build resilience and aid adaptation to climate change for both nature and people. There are kind of three main approaches that we see as a Rocha UK. The first is protecting intact ecosystems, stopping the destruction of habitats and nature that's already there, ending and avoiding deforestation, for example. The second thing is restoring degraded ecosystems, improving on what's there, bringing it back when we have destroyed it, such as coral reefs, wetlands, grasslands, and forests that are being rapidly degraded around the world. And the third sort of focus for nature-based solutions on climate change should be managing grazing, farming, harvesting areas on land and at sea. For example, by changing farming practices and fishing practices. Some of you may not know, but we used to have vast forests of kelp around the shores of Britain. We've lost, I believe, about 90% of that. Why? Because of the way we fish, bottom trawling in particular. Kelp is an amazing store of carbon. It would be a nature-based solution to climate change if we could restore our kelp forests, but we would need to change our fishing practices for that to be so. So what are some of the benefits of nature-based solutions? Well, there are multiple benefits for climate and nature, but if nature stores biological carbon in a diverse array of ecosystems, such as forests, mangroves, and grasslands, then it's obvious that if we expand those ecosystems, we're going to be capturing much more carbon. So it's good for climate change. But actually, the more we can actually restore those habitats, because they're also the home for nature, the more we're giving back to other species as well, providing them with homes and food, which will help them to adapt to climate change as well. And it's really important, this last point, because without nature and without stable climate, actually, we don't have food production. So restoring nature to help with climate change is really, really good also for human food security and well-being. Those are just some reasons why you might want to do it. And you can say, well, what's the problem? Why don't we just get on with it? However, there are risks, and it's really important to be aware of this so that we can avoid them. The first one is that if you do this the wrong way, you could actually be having very perverse and unintended side effects. So, for example, large-scale tree planting to sequester carbon could have serious negative impacts upon nature if that new forest replaces native forests or is planted on naturally occurring open spaces, plains and grasslands, which are often very diverse in their species, where instead of that, you just get a monoculture forest. That would be a disaster for nature. We don't want to do that. A second big danger is that it diverts attention from the extremely urgent need to cut global greenhouse gas emissions. We cannot get away from climate catastrophe without rapidly cutting our greenhouse gas emissions. We don't want to accidentally give the impression that this is an alternative. It's not. It cannot be used as a get out of jail free card. We still have to cut fossil fuel emissions. And that then brings another danger, that people will market projects as nature-based solutions, which aren't really making any difference. And that just becomes greenwash. It makes people think we're taking action or they're doing something good, when in fact, they're achieving nothing. So those are three risks we see that we very much wish to avoid. Now, the good news is, with our other colleagues in the wider Rocha family, we have a paper on nature-based solutions to climate change, which we brought out for COP26 last year. We'll give you the reference or the link to that later. But in that, we spell out principles which we believe the world and government should follow when doing nature-based solutions to make sure that they avoid the pitfalls and reap the benefits. And perhaps the most important principle of all is that governments have to be consistently clear about what I said earlier, that nature-based solutions cannot be a substitute for rapidly phasing out fossil fuel. Also, that nature-based solutions have to deliver for nature as well as climate. If we start saying, well, climate is more important and it's extremely important, therefore we will sacrifice this nature for climate, we'll just go round in a circle. They have to be mutually beneficial. Otherwise, we'll do damage in another place, which will also come back to haunt us. Lastly, big important principle for us is that nature-based solutions themselves cannot be a substitute for a comprehensive international drive to protect the remainder of the world's intact ecosystems. We can't just focus on solutions to climate change in nature. We have to restore nature for its own sake. One will help the other, but one is not a substitute for the other. So those are the principles, but we believe if those principles and a few others that we list in that document are implemented, actually nature-based solutions to climate change would respect the biblical principles that we think are so important of God's instructions to humans to care for his creation, but also Jesus's command to love your neighbor as yourself. So we are in a Rocha UK very for nature-based solutions to climate change, but with those caveats that it is not a substitute for cutting fossil fuel fast, and it cannot be used, if you like, and must not be used falsely or in a way that deceives people, where in fact a certain project is not actually making much difference. We must avoid greenwashing through this. So let me turn now to the Biodiversity Day at COP27. Next slide, please. You will, some of you, be aware that Biodiversity Days at climate COPs are actually themselves a rare thing. And what is intended for COP27 Biodiversity Days to kind of build on what happened last year at COP26, which was the first Biodiversity Day. The UK government put a Biodiversity Day on the agenda of COP26 as an attempt to make the links between nature and climate in a way that no previous host government had done. Some of us were there at the opening of the Biodiversity Day, and it was quite an extraordinary event. You had hardened international biodiversity people almost in tears at the front of the auditorium saying, we have waited so long for the climate process to recognize that they cannot do this without also dealing with biodiversity. It was quite an extraordinary event, the level of emotion that the world had got to that point in recognizing the link. Now, you and I might have thought, well, isn't it a bit obvious? But that's something to do with the UN system, where you have conventions on many different things. They each have their own logic, and sometimes getting them to speak to each other is not easy. So it was actually a major breakthrough last year to have a Biodiversity Day at COP26. And this year, they're building on it fast. So what are they building on? There were three very important agreements at COP26, which they're trying to take further this year at COP27. Now, most of them are around forestry, and that's only one aspect of nature-based solutions. It's interesting, we'll come back to that. But last year, they launched a community, a commitment rather, of more than 140 leaders to halt and reverse deforestation by 2030. That was launched at COP26. They also created a working group of producers and consumers of commodities linked to deforestation. And they got them to make a commitment, these traders, of soya, palm oil, cocoa, cattle, cocoa, not coca. Let me be clear about that. To prepare a roadmap to align their business practices with the 1.5 degree target. So that's what came out of last year, and they're trying to build on it fast at this year. The main vehicle they appear to have chosen to build on those three things around forestry is what they're calling a Forest and Climate Leadership Partnership. It's an ugly name, the FCLP, doesn't trip off the tongue. But this was launched just a few days ago at COP27 by people like the President of the European Union, also by our own Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, also by the Premiers of France, Ghana, Congo, Colombia, Germany. 26 countries signed up to it on the first day. This coalition seems to me to be an attempt to take those various different initiatives around forestry from last year and form a real coalition around them that will be lasting and that will actually take them forward. Now, we would really welcome that as a Rocha UK. That seems to us a very good idea, and it's good that the UK government is in the thick of this. Now, governments have suggested that if that partnership delivered on what it says it wants to do, which is to accelerate momentum to halt and reverse forest loss and degradation by 2030. So end deforestation by 2030 is the simple version. If it were to achieve that, then it would deliver 10% of the climate mitigation needed by the world by 2030. That's quite considerable. You may say, well, it's only 10%, but actually at this point, everything counts. So if you could get 10% of the mitigation we need by 2030 by ending deforestation and starting to regenerate it, why on earth wouldn't you? So that seems to us a very, very good thing to do. However, that wasn't the only announcement at the start of the conference. There are others. Another very important announcement, which we believe is going to be built on tomorrow, is the commitment made by heads of state and ministers from 112 countries to protect 30% of the land and the ocean for nature by 2030. Now, this is rapidly becoming known as 30 by 30, 30% of land and sea by 2030. So what we saw a few days ago at COP was that 112 countries made a commitment to this. And this appears to be about getting buy-in from a wider group of leaders in the run-up to COP15 in a month's time, where the world hopes to formally agree that target and flesh out an activity plan to deliver it. So that's also good news. We welcome that, and let's see how many more countries sign up to that coalition by the end of COP. But a note of caution, all of this is good, but it needs to be received with a kind of clear-eyed view of what's happened to previous international targets and commitments, which is that largely they have been not achieved at all. Lots of great statements, time has gone by, and they haven't been delivered. And when you look at the UK's performance as distinct from our government's words and promises, it's also really quite disappointing, to say the very least. So, for example, the UK government may have committed, and it actually committed a couple of years ago, to protecting 30% of our land and ocean floor in our territorial waters by 2030. But recent research by the Wildlife and Countryside Link that we are part of as a Rocha UK suggests that within England, only 3.2% of our land in England and 8% of our sea is being properly protected and managed for nature. So many of our so-called national parks and protected areas, the quality of conservation within them is terrible. They're actually degrading fast, even though they may be called a national park or a reserve. So there's this difference between the formal designation of an area and what's actually happening in practice within it. And we've really got to watch that gap, particularly in the case of the UK. So what we all want from the Biodiversity Day tomorrow is more countries signing up to these initiatives, of course. But what we also need is much more financial backing for those initiatives and the policy commitments from rich country governments in particular, that they actually put in place the policies that are going to deliver on these goals, rather than just announce wonderful sounding goals, but do very little to help bring them about. So at this point, I'm going to look ahead now to COP15. Next slide, please. So some of you may know, but just to be clear, there is a COP simply means a conference of parties to whatever convention it is. There are hundreds of UN conventions. There are hundreds of COPs that actually take place every year, but you just don't hear about them. Climate has assumed huge proportions. But next month in Montreal, we have COP15 of the Biodiversity Convention. And it's really, really important that what is talked about tomorrow at the Nature Day on COP27 of the climate process feeds in to that conference in a month's time in Montreal. And that's exactly, of course, what many of the officials and the politicians, the more progressive ones, do want. So what's the objective of COP15 then? And this is really important for those of us who love nature. Now, according to the UN website, it's a bit of a mouthful, but I'll read it verbatim so you know what they're saying, because it's actually quite inspiring were it actually to happen. COP15 will convene governments from around the world to agree a new set of goals for nature over the next decade through the Convention of Biological Diversity's post-2020 framework process. That's all a bit bureaucratic. The next bit is a bit more inspiring. The framework sets out an ambitious plan to implement broad-based action to bring about a transformation in society's relationship with biodiversity, and to ensure that by 2050, the shared vision of living in harmony with nature is fulfilled. Well, amen to that. I think we'd probably all go, yes, please, let's have that. So let's look at the proposals on the table at COP15 to bring that about. There was an interim meeting online last year because COP15 was meant to happen, but it was COVID, so it didn't. So in that interim meeting, they've already agreed, broadly speaking, that we should put the world's biodiversity on a path to recovery by 2030. Of course, the very big question is, how do we do that? So the main agenda items in Canada are really about setting clear targets to do that, about agreeing the finance and benefit sharing, and really importantly to us, defining the role of Indigenous people and communities and how their unique knowledge, their unique stewardship over millennia of so much of the world's biodiversity is actually validated and supported rather than taken away from them. It's really important that those things are worked out. Really clear targets, importantly, finance and benefit sharing, and the role of Indigenous people and communities. So we are hoping and praying that the discussions that take place tomorrow at the Biodiversity Day on climate prepare the ground for much more ambitious agreements in a month's time in Canada. That's what we must all hope for and indeed campaign for, and we'll be pointing you towards how you can do that in a minute. So, next slide, please. We'll put the links to these in the chat, but we have two position papers as a wider Rocha family. The first one, nature-based solutions to climate change, is obviously what most of this meeting is about. We prepared that as a worldwide family of Rochas in 20 different countries, and our secretariat, Rocha International, we prepared that for COP26 last year. And then the one on the right of your screen, Tackling the Three Global Crises with Faith, is the COP15 briefing, also prepared by the global family for the meeting in Montreal next month. Okay, so let me briefly now turn to where the UK government is on nature and COP15, because that's where we, as probably largely British citizens on this call, can do something about it most easily. Now, as I've said, the UK government under Boris Johnson has made some good commitments under his prime ministership. He, for example, signed us up in a world leaders agreement to that 30 by 30, 30% of land and sea protected for nature by 2030. However, the actual finance to achieve that and the achievement so far is pitiful. Then we have the Liz Truss premiership, as we will all be very familiar, which announced policies that would take us in exactly the wrong direction, threatening grave damage to nature, including lifting environmental protections in new economic development zones, abolishing the previous government's plans to reward farmers for protecting the environment, the so-called ELM scheme, environmental land managers scheme, and many other things that would go in the wrong direction. As we all know, famously or infamously, that government didn't last very long, and we now have Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. Now, he may already be signalling some changes, which is good news in some areas, but we await to see the detail. So, for example, he's already reinstated the fracking ban that Liz Truss lifted. Of course, fracking is not just about fossil fuel going into the atmosphere or emissions. It also uses a large amount of water, large amount of chemicals that is terrible for nature. So fracking is not just a climate issue, it's a nature issue. He's reinstated the moratorium, that's good. There are suggestions that he will be lifting the lifting of environmental protections in these economic development zones that Liz Truss brought in, that they are now being reviewed. There was an announcement only last week that Michael Gove is reviewing the lifting of those protections. In other words, we may get those protections back, and that we would really welcome. We're also awaiting more detail from the government, the new government, on the environmental land management scheme. We just don't know at the moment where that's going. Unfortunately, the new government has reinstated the ban on onshore wind. It's about the one thing that Liz Truss did that we actually liked, was to lift that ban. And there's no suggestion yet that the new Prime Minister will revoke the new oil and gas exploration licenses that Liz Truss brought in. Now, the most important thing this government could do for climate change, including signalling much more assertive international leadership, would be to revoke those new oil and gas exploration licenses. We haven't heard a word of that yet that I'm aware of from the new government. So it's vital that we put pressure on our own government to do two things. One is to see protecting nature and acting on climate as going hand in hand, not trading them off, but doing them together. And the second is to bring its own actions in line with its international commitments on climate and nature. So getting off fossil fuel very fast, or extending the areas of land and sea under effective protection to reach that 2030 target. Not just quoting how much acreage we've got in areas of outstanding national beauty or national parks and so on. The fact that it's designated those things doesn't mean anything if the real protections aren't taking place within that space. So that's what we're calling on the government to do. Now, for time, I'm going to be very brief about what Rocha UK is doing, but just to say, within our work, we are working on nature-based solutions all the time, particularly with our partner in action scheme of Christian land managers, where we are together managing 4,000 acres of land now for nature and for cutting carbon, but also with our eco-church scheme, encouraging churches to manage their land for nature and cutting carbon, and in our campaigning as well. This is a view of one of our partners in action, where they're doing great work on nature restoration. Lastly, what can you do? Next slide, please. We have two campaigns that they're not ours, but campaigns that we would thoroughly recommend you support. The first one is the campaign by our sister organization, Rocha Ghana, to save the Atewa forest, an absolutely pristine forest in Ghana that is so important for nature, which is under threat of being mined, basically, which would destroy it. And Daryl in a minute will talk about that, and we'll give you a link to the website where you can sign a petition in support of them. And the other is this urgent conversation campaign that the RSPB has just launched to put pressure on our own government in the run-up to COP15 next month, in order to push for much more ambitious goals and targets and the finance, all the things I was talking about that we need from COP15. At the moment, the British government is sounding good, but it's not actually putting up the money or the policies here at home, let alone supporting others to do them more abroad in the degree that we would like and we feel is necessary. So we can give you details of how to support those campaigns, but the easiest thing, if you go to the next slide, and my last slide, is sign up for Wild Christian. Wild Christian is our monthly bulletin. It's free. You can do it on the website. That will give you details of the campaigns that we are supporting, usually other people's. We're a small little charity. We don't run too many of our own campaigns, but we are really happy to join other people's campaigns and lend a Christian voice to them. So please do sign up to Wild Christian to get more information about that. We are small, and to do things like this tonight also is not free. So if you are able to even consider giving, I don't know, the cost of a posh coffee to us once a month, do think about making a donation or becoming a regular financial supporter. You can do that online. You can set your own amount of money you want to give, but even a small amount helps us because we know it's coming and we can plan for it. And then I've given you the link there to the Atewa Rainforest campaign that I mentioned, and also the link to the Urgent Conversation campaign by RSPB.
Thank you so much, Daryl. Live from COP27. We're really appreciative that you can talk to us and have this mini interview. What has happened, or for anyone that doesn't know about Atewa, if you don't mind to explain a little bit, and then are there updates, what's been happening in this last year in terms of the campaign?
Okay, so Saving Atewa Forest is a campaign that we have been leading since 2012. And we are more concerned about the forest because it's one of the most, I would say, intact forests we have in the country, located in the eastern region of the country. It is a forest of very significant biological and public goods, provided public goods services to Ghanaians, both those within the communities around the forest and those far away from the forest in the cities. The forest provides water to about 5 million people in 3 regions in the country, including the capital city. So it's really, really significant to our water provisioning services. Aside that, it is seen by scientists to be a habitat with significant biodiversity. Currently, as we speak, we've identified not less than 100 species that are currently on the IUCN endangered list. And aside that, the forest has also, benefited from several protection categories, from a high biodiversity area to an IBA, important bird area. It's very critical, not only to Ghana, but also to the international community. In 2020, we had the IUCN approve a resolution to ensure that the global organizations take action to secure this forest against any bauxite mining interest, because since 2017, the government had planned to mine the forest as part of a $2 billion financial package in China. And our campaign has been to ensure that this never happens, so we can secure the ecosystem services, whilst at the same time working with government to find green pathways that can bring sustainable jobs to the people living within the landscape of the forest, whilst at the same time making sure that in the long term, the forest can become a national park. It's a significant forest to us, and that has been what has motivated the campaign. And we keep praying and also working to ensure that we sustain the campaign and try and stop any attempt to mine it. In terms of what has been the updates, since 2020, when we filed a case in court against our government, we have been trying to consolidate the gains in terms of the advocacy we started way back. And since then, we've seen that government action to target the forest has reduced significantly. So we are trying to sustain that momentum, stall any activity by government to mine the forest, whilst at the same time also we keep monitoring to see, we are monitoring daily on several platforms, several from the corridors of power. We have people we talk to there to give us information on what they are planning and anything. But I can say confidently that now, as we speak, there is no active interest by government now, because there's been so much pressure, both from the international community and also from within Ghana by civil society and even government agencies. So it's been to sustain, our plan has been to sustain this momentum. But I think what we have seen recently is the fact that whilst we are trying to stall the activities of government, we've seen a lot of encroachment from communities living around the forest, mainly because they saw that because of the looming bauxite threat, they thought the forest was lost. So most people started targeting the forest for farming activities and also for illegal mining. And that has been the focus of our engagement now, to also minimize these threats, so that should the government plans be off the table, we can have a forest of good integrity to make a national park. Even though we are in court, we are still engaging with government and other development partners like the European Union and the UNDP to ensure that we are still able to pursue an investment drive to bring financing to support the green development pathways we have proposed right from the beginning. Whilst we are keeping an eye on what government plans to do and also to avert whatever government plans to do, we are spending a lot of effort now to manage encroachment by local communities. And this is where our biggest challenge is now. And we believe that if we can get more support, yes, we need the prayers, but we also need to help the community find more livelihood opportunities that can allow them to take their hands off the forest even as we work towards finding the necessary or the relevant financial instruments to support their livelihood needs and also meet the other needs that they have, which is making them target the forest for their livelihood at the moment.
Is there a message that you'd love to share with our supporters and for us? Is there something we can pray about or something different you'd like to say?
Yes, I think definitely what I would say is that we still need support for the work in Atiwa. We need the prayers. We need the prayers to come to support, give us more strength and capacity to take on the challenges that we are facing. We also need a lot of financial resources to sustain the momentum on the ground. And we also need you to reach out to your government to make take more bolder steps in supporting developing countries when it comes to adaptation finance. I think there's been some promises, but these promises are not enough. So within your coalitions and alliances and networks, we hope that you always put on the table the need to ensure climate justice by letting the resources flow to countries that are least responsible, but now bearing a lot of the risks associated with climate change. So I think that this cannot be underestimated in terms of prayers and all of that. So we hope you keep supporting wherever you can, and also share more the link for the petition. It's still relevant to us as we prepare ourselves to go to court in January in 2023. We hope that we keep the support coming, not only for Atiwa, but for other environmental crimes that are going on within our country, and for which we are also contributing to in terms of advocacy and lobbying at the country level. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Hannah, for sharing this. Yeah, do be praying for the Rocha Ghana team as they network at COP27. And Daryl, part of the interview didn't share, he was saying that they're watching their sweet smiling faces and the promises that their government are making very closely. And this is something that must be happening with many other countries as well. So how do we keep our own government accountable and support other countries as well? So I've been really struck by Daryl's courage when I spoke with him. So we've got 8 minutes or so left. We just want to put the links up with the Tewa campaign again, and but these will be sent in an email. We've got still admitting a few people. Do sign up to Wild Christian. We're planning to hold many more events in 2023. So you'll hear about these events first as part of the Wild Christian community. We also have a Facebook group, and it's a great space to share victories, challenges of how you're caring for creation in your own communities. We've also got a new website and a Speak Up webpage for resources to help you speak up for nature. And on this page, you'll find presentations and more about different campaigns, nature-based related campaigns that we support as a charity. And on this page, there's a range of blogs from biblical campaigners to how to look after yourself and campaign in the long run. So do become a financial supporter if you feel that's appropriate. Support the Atewa Forest campaign and also the Urgent Conversation campaign. This is a new campaign that was launched just on Monday, and it's a push before COP15. So that would be a real good one to sign. I'm just going to read a prayer as we go. The prayer was written by our Eco Church support officer for the North of England, Lucy Foster, ahead of COP27's Biodiversity Day. So Lord, we pray for all the species that you spoke into being through your Holy Spirit. For all that you call good, we thank you. For the familiar, the strange to us, and that known only to you, we thank you. Please guide the discussions tomorrow so eyes may be open to the wonder, diversity and worth of all species you have made. Grab hold of the hearts and minds of decision makers and direct them to consider the impact of human action upon the web of creation and the need for nature-based solutions to respond to the threat of climate change and to nurture the mass and variety of biodiversity. Lord, we pray for the Urgent Conversation campaign, asking world leaders at the Biodiversity COP15 to commit to a global plan to save nature. May their message be amplified and may voices be heard in the call to protect nature. For the renewal and hallowing of your earth, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.